and welcome everyone to the PMO Virtual Summit. We have Emma all the way from London in the UK. Welcome, Emma. Welcome to the summit.
Thank you for having me, Hussein. It's an honor.
It's great to have you here. And we're going to be talking about the all-elusive topic of values and PMOs. I'm sure you have a ton to say, but sadly, we just have a short time to talk about it. We can go on and on and on about it. But excited to have you here. And we're really going to go into the basics of it, right? Really trying to figure out what is it and why is value always so elusive to PMOs. Excited to get into that, Emma. But before I hand it over to you, I would love to tell the audience a bit about you. Emma Ruth Arnaz Pemberton is the Director of Consulting Services for Wellington Project Management in the UK, a Fellow of the Association for Project Management, and the Chair of the PMO Specific Interest Group, or the SIG, at the Association for Project Management as well. Emma, pleasure to have you here again, and over to you.
Thank you, Hussein. So just a little bit more about me. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I am quite involved in the industry, both here in the UK and abroad, through a number of different organisations. So the Association for Project Management being one of the key ones. I have many jobs with them at the moment. I'm also involved with Project Managers Without Borders and Project Managers Against Poverty, who are really trying to bring project management to the forefront, both in terms of developing people and also assisting areas that are struggling from disasters or something like that. I'm also a certified PMO Value Ring consultant. That's part of the PMO Global Alliance. And at Wellington, that's my main job. I am the Director of Consulting Services, so my role is really to help our team and our clients to mature in their PMO and project management maturity. I'm also our event organizer, kind of. So I'm in charge of Future PMO, which is our flagship conference, and Project Management Day of Service, which is a charitable day where we invite small to medium-sized charities to come and get a day of free consulting to help them develop their strategy or their plans for the next few months. If you want to find me, I am PMO Ninjas across all of the normal social media channels, and my contact details will be available at the end. So as Hussein mentioned, I am going to be talking about value. It is elusive, and the slides you're going to see today are a little bit of an excerpt from our PMO Practitioner Course, which is accredited by the APM. It's the only course in the UK that is accredited by them. And it talks really around how do we define what value is, what considerations do we need to think about before we start doing any work in that space. And hopefully I'll give you some hints and tips on how you can make that journey a little bit easier for yourself. So Wellington do a big survey once a year. It's called the State of Project Management in the UK. And we thought, I thought I would start with some key interesting facts. So in the UK, 80% of organisations have one or more PMOs in place already. However, only 29% of those believe that they've realised their full potential in terms of contributing value to the organisation, which is a really low number when you think about all the PMOs that are now out there. So it does beg the question, what are we actually doing if we can't show that we're adding value, or we don't feel like we're adding value to an organisation? So that's really the premise for the whole of the next few slides that I'm going to take you through, is to try and understand why this happens and how to make it better for yourself in your organisation. So one of my key things is always go back to why. My favourite TED speaker, Simon Sinek, said, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And I've pretty much lived that way for the rest of my life since I watched that video. So some of the things that we need to consider when we're trying to add a PMO that is seen as a value-adding partner of the organisation is why. Quite often we don't ask that question. Somebody just says, we need a PMO, and we build what we think the organisation needs. But then we quite a lot of the time it fails, and people never understand why. And that's what we need to actually ask that question in the beginning. Go back to our sponsors, our customers, and say, what is it that you're expecting exactly? Because their view might be very different to your view. Once we know the why, we need to consider attractiveness of it for the organization, as well as, is it achievable? Can we even do it? And it's only when you understand the why and you understand the fact whether we can do it, if we have the people, the resources, the time, the available headspace when it comes to change, until you actually decide if we should actually do it, do set up a PMO or a particular project. No matter what our organizations are working on, these two questions need to be asked. Why should we do it? Can we do it? And that will tell us if we should do it. So as part of setting up a PMO, you need to create a PMO business case. This isn't a shock. We do it for all of our projects, so why wouldn't we do it for this kind of activity? The difference is that we don't do it. We don't actually sit down and understand what the business need and opportunity is, the big fat why. We don't really look at our options. We don't sit down and understand what are the potential options, just like we would do with a project. Do nothing is always the first option. Spend a load of money and get an all singing, all dancing solution, or do something in the middle. So we don't really evaluate that. We just kind of get thrown right in and we just run. We start running and hope that the organization can catch up with us in terms of what we try to achieve. Then we need to ensure that we look at what the solution that we've selected actually is. So is it actually aligned? Are we trying to fix one tiny problem, or are we actually aligning and setting up a PMO for our wider organizational strategy? Is it the right thing to do right now, or are we just trying to maybe get more visibility? Then you need to do implementation. So you need to plan that out. It's not as simple as deciding that we'll just get on with it and hope that we don't fall over. We need to make sure that we have a plan in place, that we have resources. And it's very rare when I go to a lot of organizations to help them with their PMO. And it's very rare for me to be given, this is the original business case. This is what we were trying to achieve and the problems that we were trying to negate from the organization. So when deciding, should we even have a PMO, the bigger question is, do we need a PMO? Or are you trying to do something very, very small with a very, very big hammer? So that's kind of the second thing for me. Once you've asked why and you've understood that it is achievable, it could be done, is actually understand if it's something that you really, really need. As you look at this business case, it would be interesting to kind of go through and see if you know this information for your PMO. So actually analysing the problems, the pains that your customers are feeling right now. Understanding what is it that we're trying to achieve, what are the objectives that we're trying to put a PMO in place to actually give back to the organisation. What's in and out of scope? Importantly, out of scope. I'm sure many of you have had an experience where somebody said, oh, you're free, you don't do that much, go and do this other thing for me, which is completely out of our natural remit. And that's okay sometimes, as long as you can have a grown-up conversation. And without understanding who it is that you're trying to be, what need you're trying to fit into, you won't be able to have grown-up conversations. You will only be able to go, yeah, okay, but we'll carry on and do everything else as well. That's not a sustainable business model for a PMO, and that's not how you add value. So really understanding what is the business case for your particular PMO will really help you and give you lots of ammunition to have proper grown-up conversations. It's no different to any other program of work that you're supporting today. As we were developing the PMO Practitioner Course, we kind of felt that we needed to create or put into place a PMO value lifecycle, because value is so difficult. I've often been asked, what's the point of a PMO? And it's quite hard to answer if you don't actively track the value you're providing to the organization. So the first part of that value lifecycle is to capture the value, is to understand how value is perceived by our customers, by your customers. Your your idea on value might be very different. I did a benefits summit a year ago, and I had 40 people in the room, and I asked them, what does value mean to your organization? And they came back with 30 different types of value. And that wasn't all financial value. There was lots and lots of different things. So you need to understand the perception of value, because that is all that it is. I can have a perception that something is valuable and you might think it's silly or frivolous. But fundamentally, we need to know what our customers, whoever our PMO is going to serve, what does value mean to them? So if you work for a financial institution, you might think, oh, well, it's all about profit. And actually, it isn't a lot of the time. Financial institution, quite often, the value that they look for and they want to prove is that they have their customers' money secure, in a secure way, and that they are doing everything they can to keep that safe. If you work for a food manufacturing business, chances are it's not about profit. The real value for them is about traceability and the quality of their products, because if you get that right, then the profit will take care of itself to a point. So really understanding what does value mean in your organization, and then build your PMO once you understand what that thread looks like, so that you are talking the same language and you can show that you're adding to what the organization already believes in. You don't have to be a separate entity. You can be integrated into the way the organization works. The next step of the value lifecycle is deliver it. So understanding what services you can deploy within your PMO that are going to add that value. It's really easy a lot of the time for us to go, I'm going to set up a PMO, I'll go and look at the methodologies. The chances are the methodology is already in place. It might not be what you would want, but people know how to use it. So why change it? Actually, there will be other things that you might be able to focus on that are A, quicker to do, less painful to do, and will add actually more value to your customers. So once you understand what it is they want and what it is that is important to them, you then can genuinely sit down and create a service catalogue that is going to genuinely give back the value that people are expecting. It isn't always about going straight to the methods and the processes. We all love a good process flow, don't get me wrong, but it isn't always the first thing that you should do, any more than you should automatically go to benefits realization, because that's a really hard thing to do. We know that from the research that we do. For 3 years running, it's been one of the top 2 most difficult processes to embed. So don't try and pick all the big stuff and boil the ocean, but actually deliver the services that are going to add value incrementally. You don't have to get it all in one big bang approach. The next stage of the value lifecycle is to measure that value. How can we know if we're delivering value is the key question here. How do we know that? How do we prove it? I've been asked to prove it before now. Prove it. What is it that you do? How do you add value? And that's a really hard thing to do, because naturally we don't measure ourselves. We don't measure the value that a PMO brings to the organization. We tend to focus on how the project's doing, how the project manager's performing. We very rarely look at ourselves. So you need to measure value, not just on how the projects and other people are performing, but genuinely look internally and define some KPIs or some metrics or some way of showing your organization what value your PMO actually adds. The last section of the PMO value lifecycle is to communicate that value. Something that, again, we're not particularly good at in PMOs is to actually shout about all the good stuff that we do all of the time. We focus very much on things like lessons learned and what went wrong, but actually we should be also focusing and shouting about all the things that we do really, really well. The only way to do that, you will have many vehicles, is to talk to people, engage people. You have a community, use it, whether it's internal to your organization or external through all of the social networks that are out there today. But actually tell people what it is that you do. That will bring everybody's perception of your value much higher. If they're only ever hearing about, well, this went wrong, but we fixed it, or that went wrong and we never want that to happen again, then your value will be diminished. But if you shout about the things that you have done well, have a pizza party when you finish a project and it's gone particularly well, then the value perception of your customers will absolutely skyrocket. I've talked a little bit about metrics, and I'm going to delve into them a little bit more now. Metrics are a trap sometimes. We do try and bring everything down to a number so that we can prove that we're doing what we said we would do and how we said we would do it. The key for me when you're looking at metrics to measure your PMO is that less is more. Sometimes it is just about one thing. Everybody doesn't need to know all of the information. So do pick and choose wisely. If you put 100 bits of data in front of somebody, that isn't going to get them to believe that you add value any more than if you put one bit of information in front of them that tells them nothing. So you need to make sure that you pick your metrics well. And you also need to make sure that they tell a story. There's a very big difference between data and information. You'll be collecting data all of the time. That data is pretty useless if you give it to somebody in a big old spreadsheet or a big SharePoint site. Actually making sure that you can tell a story through your metrics will really engage people. An interesting fact is that facts told as part of a story are 20 times more likely to be absorbed by the listener or the reader because they remember the context. So do think about that. And I will give you one example. We had a PMO and we developed a balance scorecard for them so that they could measure themselves as well as the projects. And they had one of their key objectives was all around training and development of people. So one of their metrics was to schedule 4 sessions every month, which is fine. Anybody that knows how to use Outlook can do that. So it was always green. Great. Everybody's happy. PMO's awesome. Then we added another metric because it wasn't telling us anything. It was just telling us that somebody knows how to schedule stuff. So we added another metric that basically asked the question, how many people register for these events? So we had like 80 people register in a month. Great. Everything's lovely. PMO are doing a great job. Then we added another metric that told us how many people actually showed up. And it was like 30 throughout the month. So all of a sudden, PMO have gone from being awesome to being quite rubbish at engaging people to come to their training sessions. But then the last metric was all around why. So we added in a reason code. And what we found is that the people that had registered were taken off the training because other priorities had come along. So that really told a story from, yeah, PMO can do their bit, but fundamentally it changed the narrative. Because all of a sudden it wasn't the PMO's fault that people didn't show up. It was all about making sure that if you're going to make people responsible for their own development, you need to give them the bandwidth to be able to do that. So all of a sudden the managers were the ones under pressure and under the microscope as to how are you using your team, because it's not effective if you're having to do this. So it really changed the narrative. So that's just one example of how you can tell a story with the data that you're collecting. Some other tips, work with your customers. You are a service provider of sorts, so you have customers, so you need to work with them. Don't just build or develop or track what you think is important. Actually ask them what they want. Ask them, go back and ask the why. Make sure that you set baselines and targets. We do it for projects, so why would we not do it for ourselves? The only useful KPI is actionable. So that story that I told you had an action against it in terms of not necessarily for us, but certainly for the managers to be able to give their people the time to develop themselves. And use a process, plan, do, check, act, or whatever process you want to use to make sure that you're constantly checking that the metrics are right. When I develop a balance scorecard, I would average it takes between 4 to 6 months to get the measures right. It isn't a one-shot deal. It isn't something that you can do quickly. But once you have it and it's in place, it can add enormous actual value to the PMO and really demonstrate to the organization what it is that you actually do. The PMO specific interest group do a PMO wisdom series. So you need to do this. Measure wisely. Not because something's easy to measure or because it makes you look good. Make sure that you measure what's important. Not just what's important for you, but what's important to your organization. If you don't do that, then it's just another spreadsheet or whatever of data. It's just another report that somebody has to look at. You need to make sure that you choose your measurements wisely. And think about the people. People matter in your PMO. People deliver projects is a famous saying. So really think about what abilities do your people have that you can leverage to really add the most value possible. So this is a view of our competence framework. It's designed specifically for PMOs, PMO people, and it's delivered in a number of ways, but generally through a mentoring program. And what it does is it splits the competencies of PMO people into strategy, delivery, and capability. Once you've defined what value means for your organization, and then you've understood what it is that your stakeholders and sponsors actually want and need, when you're defining your service catalog, if you're really clever, you can really look at the people that you've got. We can't often get a load of new people just because we feel like it. So actually looking at, do we have people that sit more naturally in the strategic space? Because they can really pick up some of those value-adding pieces of information, such as analysis and reporting. Do we have people who are really, really good at stakeholder management and communication? Can we use them to build a community that's going to eventually turn into an ecosystem that feeds itself? Or do we have people who are really good at delivery, who can really focus on how good are we at governance or at the methods and frameworks or at change, so that we can get the most bang for the buck of our organization? You need to consider the whole of the people that you have. Every person plays in every single one of these areas. It's just about understanding, A, how you can leverage that, what they do now and how good they are at it now for the PMO that you're going to build, but also how you can elevate your PMO through developing your people around this wheel. If you do that and you understand that people matter, you will be able to build a really value-adding PMO that will take your PMO to the future, and your organization will be much more mature because of it. So what? I've given you brief hints and tips and the value life cycle. All PMOs go through the same journey. This is something I've found through working with many organizations. It's all the same, it's just a slightly different flavor. That doesn't mean that you can lift and shift things from one to the next in terms of organizations, but it does mean that fundamentally having the same life cycle of value, understanding what your stakeholders want and need and what your organization believes, defining the value-adding services that you're going to provide, making sure that you measure that and that you are able to actively communicate it constantly, fundamentally is the same journey. It's just a slightly different flavor. And my last tip for today is to learn from others' experiences. You're here now, so you're already doing this, hopefully, but take the opportunities. There's lots and lots out there and lots of people out there who are willing to help and share. So if you're stuck, ask a question. If you find that you're interested in a conversation, get involved. You can learn from others' experiences and other people can learn from yours. So really get involved in the PMO journey of you and other people as well. If you want to get in touch with me, these are my contact details. And also, as I said earlier, you can search for PMO Ninjas on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else. And I'm more than happy to answer questions or help you with anything that you might need. I'll hand back over to Hussein at this point.
Hi, Emma.
Hi.
That was a great presentation. Thank you so much for that.
You're more than welcome.
You know, I'm sure, I mean, the question of values in general just draws so many questions. Mm-hmm. And, people usually also drown themselves in this whole analysis paralysis phase in terms of value. What is this value? What am I doing? And before even figuring out, like you mentioned, the perception of value, they just go right into it, immerse themselves into metrics, go around reading blogs or different posts, books, Googling stuff up. Let's put in as many metrics as possible. And you know what? That really sort of ends up shooting themselves in the foot. So,
absolutely.
So that whole perspective, and I'm so glad you mentioned Simon Sinek, right? I love his whole concept of the why first, and it's important in everything that you do, right? So thank you so much for sharing that perspective, Emma. Really, really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome.
Emma, one thing that I keep on answering people, and I would love to get your perspective as well. You know, PMOs at the end of the day are just a department. They're just a business unit, so much so like an accounting department or an IT department or a marketing department, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
But why do you think that is such a struggle for PMOs when it comes to identifying their value, right? Nobody goes and asks an accounting department, all right, what value are you bringing to the table? You're not bringing any value, all right, we're going to shut you down. Or, you know, nobody's questioning why you're even being set up, right? Why is it then that with PMOs, that's always an issue?
So it's interesting because I had that once. We had a change in leadership, and I was the PMO manager at the time, and the new gentleman kind of pulled us all into a room individually and looked at us individually and said, "What's the point of you?" And we went into, as you normally do, all the best practice words you can think of. Well, you know, we do best practice and we do assurance and blah, blah, blah. And he said, yeah, but I have perfectly good project managers who can do that job. So what's the point of you? And I found that really hard to answer at the time. I hadn't been a PMO for that long. And I genuinely couldn't find the words to kind of really sell ourselves. And since then, as you can imagine, I've kind of made it a little bit my mission to be able to answer that question. It wasn't a very comfortable day at work, I have to say. The reason that value is hard is because we can't, it's really hard to prove it. And that's the reason why then we don't bother. It's because it's hard. It's really hard. And that's why really understanding what's important, what it is you're trying to achieve, and then not just telling people how the project managers are doing, but really looking internally at how you are performing as a department, because the accounting department has metrics. They have to be able to prove that what they're doing is efficient and effective. And quite often that doesn't exist for PMO. Either people don't know how, or they're not actually brave enough to say, do you know what, we suck at this and we're going to get better. And this is what we need from the organization. There is also an element that the organization doesn't really know what they want or need from PMO. So I think it's kind of a culmination of all of those. And now in our PMO Practitioner Course, we do a whole section on the elevator pitch. How do you sell yourself into your organization? And how do you measure yourself in such a way that it allows everybody else to see what it is that you bring to the table? And part of that is, so using things like a balanced scorecard that tells a story rather than just, yeah, we did 10 projects this month. Because fundamentally, people like to hear stories. We're all human and we are drawn to that. And by really being able to say, you told me about this pain and here's some actual evidence to show you how we've got rid of it and what benefit it's given us, rather than a metric with a number at the end, is much more valuable. But I think that people either don't know how or don't have the confidence to kind of say, we can't do that right now, or we don't know, or we're all red. When I set up my first ever PMO balanced scorecard, it was red for the first 9 months of the whole year. From day one, it was red and it stayed red. And I was happy for it to be red because it gave us something to focus on every single month. We picked a different one. And I'll never forget the day when it kind of went to amber, and then a few months after it went to green overall. And it was a real win for us. And we could genuinely show a journey. And that's what it is. It's down to acknowledging that it's not a one-shot deal. There isn't a magic bullet. It is a journey, and setting the expectation that it's a journey. And then you can talk to them about how you're doing. So I think that's why it's hard. And that's kind of what I've tried to do to combat it a little bit.
No, that's fantastic, Emma. And you're right. It's absolutely a journey. And I think as part of the journey, and, you know, one thing that I've seen, and, you know, what your experience has been, is that part of the journey, you know, when you're setting up a PMO, usually a lot of people get affected, right? There's an impact in terms of, you know, who people are reporting to, how they're doing things, how they're processing information, what kind of information they're receiving. So that change management aspect comes into play, right? And sometimes it's just more of a reaction versus do I really care or want to know about what the value is? It's more of a reaction, sort of a pushback, right? So I mean, not that other departments don't have interoperability and don't have impacts, etc. But I do feel that when a PMO gets into a place, it sort of has ripples along the way, and I think the pushback is more when that situation happens, and that's what the question and scrutiny is a lot more on. Why you guys here? We're doing well without you. But that's also just I think a reaction versus a genuine concern.
Yeah, change is scary, and ironically, we affect change, and we're also affected by change. But that's what PMOs do. We bring change in one way or another. We bring change, whether it's stuff that we want to change or the projects that are happening. We are fundamentally in the middle of that, and people are naturally scared of change. That it's just a human reaction. So you're absolutely right, and that's a really good way of putting it. The key for me then is to, like I said, people matter. Don't just sit in an ivory tower and develop what you think. Actually bring those people on the journey. The most successful PMOs that I've built have all been built with the project managers and the business analysts in IT and the managers, so that everybody feels like they're part of the same journey and they understand why. And those are the successful ones. Those are the ones that people get. Nobody destroys what one helps to build. And if we take out the mechanics and focus on the people, and you did nothing on the mechanics, nothing on the processes, nothing on the methods, if they get it, then you'll be winning anyway.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense, Emma. Emma, you did mention something about the elevator pitch neurons right there. One thing that I wanted to ask you, and I think this is more of I would love to sort of hear your perspective on it, in the sense that a lot of people on this session might be aspiring PMO leaders, but others might be first-time PMO leaders. So really want to sort of help them get that level of comfort. What is okay, right? And the reality is that monetary benefits of PMOs are usually long-term in nature. So what kind of an elevator pitch they can use to still push the case for the PMOs confidently and say, yeah, you know what? Sure, it's a long-term situation, but here are some of the things that we can do, and it's okay. What can PMO leaders do in situations like that?
I think when I get people to kind of create their elevator pitches for their PMO, obviously keep it short, but that makes it really hard. Also try and take out as many project words as you can, because project speak is a language that most people don't understand, most normal people anyway. But yeah, so there are kind of 3 or 4 steps for me. The first one is tell people what it is that you're there to achieve long term. So exactly as you say, certainly the financial benefits and some of the other benefits are long term. So what is your vision for the PMO? What is it that you're bringing to the organization if you're allowed to continue? So, my PMO is in place because we are trying to make this organization best in class when it comes to managing and dealing with change. The next thing that you need to do is to make yourself tell them what it is, how you do that. So we do this by bringing the right tools and the right processes so that people can effectively, efficiently, without bureaucracy, manage their projects using the approach that works best for them. So actually tell people what you're bringing in order to get you to that. And then really important is to make yourselves unique. So every PMO is unique. You are different, and that's good. That's nothing to be scared about. You're different to the accounting team or the learning and development team. So use the hell out of that and really make yourself stand out. And in an elevator pitch, that is, we do this because we have the only community infrastructure that people subscribe to in our organization, and we have 150 subscribers. That could be massive or it could be quite small, but something will make you different and unique. And then the next part of the elevator pitch is to engage. don't just speak and then walk away. Actually engage and ask a question. Have you had any experience of working within the change since we've been around? Have you noticed anything change? That as an elevator pitch of what's the long term, how, the mechanics of how, what makes you different, and engaging with the question is usually around 30 seconds worth of gold in terms of being able to everybody answer the same if somebody says, what does the PMO do?
Makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, Emma. Thank you so much for that. Emma, to close it out, one final question. And obviously this is probably going to be people's favorite topic, metrics.
Metrics.
Metrics, KPIs. You talked about two important elements in your presentation about KPIs. Number one, that they should be important.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, they should be actionable.
Yep.
Right. When people are drowning themselves in a sea of KPIs, what can they do to determine which metrics are important and which are actionable?
So the first thing, my first piece of advice is rationalize, and you'll probably get rid of half of the ones that you're drowning in anyway. But yeah, understanding, if you know what you're trying to achieve because you've asked the why question, it's very, very tempting to then, like you say, have 100 metrics that tell you lots of data but no real information. So really focus on the roadmap. You don't have to measure everything right now. So focus on your roadmap. If your first step is to get decent reporting out, then you want to have some metrics right now that are focused around consistency of information, quality of information. That way, you can roll the metrics as you go. So some metrics will be monthly, as an example. You might have some that you only track quarterly because they're important, but that's not your focus right now. Just because you have a bunch of metrics doesn't mean that you have to have them all exactly running in the same profile. So I've had metrics that are weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually, all in the same balanced scorecard. So for me, that's how you do it. You focus on what's our next 2 or 3 steps in our roadmap. Let's actually focus on those metrics that are going to help us to get to those particular bits and that level of maturity. And then you can switch those down. You can dial those down and dial some others up. And that way you're never then going to have stakeholders that get complacent because they get the same information every single time. Eventually they start ignoring the red. So actually by dialing up and down the different kinds of metrics based on your roadmap will keep it fresh and it will keep people engaged.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much for that. That was a great session. And I thank you again for being a part of the summit.
Thank you for having me and good luck with the rest of it.
Thanks so much, Emma. Before we go, I do want to make sure that I let the audience know, especially for all of you guys who are joining us from the UK, Wellington is having a project management day of service as part of the PM for Change. It's happening in December, and you can learn more about it at wellington.co.uk/project-management-day-service-PMDOS. Thank you, Emma, once again. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.